Everyone saw a fairy tale. She had the billionaire, the ring, the perfect life. But what they didn't see was that every time she spoke, his eyes searched for me. And when their dream wedding came crashing down, it wasn't just her perfect world that shattered. It was mine too. Because the truth was far messier than anyone imagined. And karma? Karma had been watching all along. My name is Emma, and what I'm about to tell you is a story that's haunted me for years. It's about love, betrayal, and how the universe has a twisted way of balancing the scales. Trust me, you've never heard anything like this before. I was 26 when I first met them. Victoria Sterling and Alexander Kane. If you lived in Manhattan and had any connection to high society, you knew their names. She was the kind of woman who seemed born for magazine covers, tall, blonde, with cheekbones that could cut glass and a smile that launched 1,000 charity galas. He was tech royalty worth $2.8 billion, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through people's souls. I was just an event coordinator trying to make a name for myself in the luxury events world. When Victoria hired me to plan their engagement party, I thought it was my big break. Finally, a chance to work with Manhattan's golden couple, the pair that gossip magazines called America's Royal Couple. The night of their engagement party, I watched from the corner as Alexander gave his speech about Victoria. He had this way of speaking that made everyone hang on his every word, but something felt off. The words were perfect, polished, but they felt empty. Like he was reading from a script instead of speaking from his heart. Victoria beamed beside him, her diamond ring catching the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a performance. That's when it started. The silent moments. The looks. It was at their second event that I really noticed it. A charity auction for children's hospitals. One of those glittering affairs where people bid ridiculous amounts on art they'd never hang just to see their names in the society pages. Victoria was giving a speech about the importance of giving back, her voice carrying across the ballroom like honey. She was in her element, commanding attention, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. But Alexander wasn't watching her. His eyes had found mine across the crowded room, and for 15 seconds that felt like 15 minutes, we were locked in this moment of pure, unfiltered connection. I felt my breath catch in my throat. There was something raw in his gaze, something desperate, like he was drowning and I was the only one who could see it. I told myself I was imagining things. This was Alexander Kane, billionaire, engaged to one of the most beautiful women in New York. And I was just Emma, the girl who made sure the flowers were arranged right and the champagne never ran out. But then Victoria's voice broke through my thoughts. "Emma," she called out, her tone sharp enough to cut through the crowd's chatter. "We need more champagne at table 7. It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. That night, as I was packing up, Victoria approached me with news that would change everything. She wanted me to coordinate their wedding. Not just any wedding, the wedding of the century, she called it. 6 months to plan the event that would be featured in every major magazine, attended by celebrities, politicians, and royalty. "I want everything perfect," she said, her manicured fingers drumming against her clutch. "Absolutely perfect. Can you handle that, Emma?" I should have said no. Looking back now, I should have walked away right then. But the opportunity was too big, too career-defining to pass up. So I said yes, sealing my fate with that single word. What I didn't know was that those 6 months would unravel everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the price of truth. The wedding planning consumed my life. While Victoria spent her days shopping and socializing, I found myself spending countless hours with Alexander, going over every detail. The flowers, the music, the menu, the guest list, everything had to be flawless for his bride-to-be. But somewhere between choosing centerpieces and tasting cakes, I began to see the real Alexander Kane. Not the cold businessman from the magazines, but a man who remembered my coffee order after the second meeting, who asked about my family and actually listened to the answers, who had this quiet way of making everyone around him feel important, valued. The late nights were the worst. Or maybe they were the best, I still can't decide. Victoria would be at some social event or spa appointment, and Alexander and I would find ourselves alone in his office, surrounded by wedding plans and takeout containers. During one of these sessions, about 3 months into the planning, he finally opened up to me. "Do you ever feel trapped in your own life?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We were going over seating arrangements, but his attention was somewhere else entirely. I looked up from my charts to find him staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights below. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Don't we all?" He turned to face me then, and I saw something vulnerable in his expression, something that made my chest tighten. "I built this empire, this life, but sometimes I feel like I'm watching someone else live it. Like I'm playing a role that someone wrote for me." We talked until 3 in the morning that night. About dreams we'd given up, paths we'd never taken, the weight of expectations. I learned that Alexander had wanted to be a teacher before his tech company took off, that he still donated anonymously to schools in his hometown, that beneath all that wealth and power, he was just a man who felt profoundly alone. I should have left then. Should have made my excuses and gone home. Instead, I stayed, drawn to this glimpse of the man behind the billboard. The almost kiss happened during a venue walkthrough. We were at the cathedral where the ceremony would take place, just the two of us checking acoustics and lighting. The space was empty, echoing with our footsteps and whispered conversations. Alexander was standing at the altar, looking lost in thought, when I approached him with a question about the processional music. "Emma," he said, and something in the way he said my name made me freeze. He stepped closer and I could smell his cologne, could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. His hand came up to touch my cheek, and I felt myself leaning into his touch despite every rational thought in my head screaming at me to stop. We were inches apart when Victoria's voice echoed through the cathedral. "Alexander? Emma? Where are you two?" The spell broke instantly. We sprang apart like guilty teenagers, my heart hammering against my ribs as Victoria's heels clicked across the marble floor. But what I discovered next changed everything. Victoria's demands had become impossible. She wanted me available 24/7, treating me less like a professional and more like her personal servant. She would call at midnight with changes to the floral arrangements, demand I cancel my other clients to focus solely on her wedding, and speak to me like I was beneath her notice. The breaking point came during a meeting with other vendors. Victoria was in rare form, critiquing everything from the photographer's portfolio to the caterer's menu suggestions. When I tried to advocate for one of the vendors, a small business owner who'd been struggling, Victoria's mask slipped entirely. "Emma, darling," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I think you're forgetting your place here. You're just the help. Leave the important decisions to people who actually matter." The room fell silent. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, humiliation burning through me like acid. But before I could respond, Alexander's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "That's enough, Victoria." His tone was deadly quiet, the kind of quiet that made boardrooms tremble. "Emma is a professional, and you will treat her with respect." The fight that followed was epic. I tried to make myself invisible as they argued in sharp, hissed whispers, but I caught enough to understand that this wasn't their first disagreement about how Victoria treated people she considered beneath her social status. That night, I made a discovery that shattered whatever illusions I still had about the golden couple. I'd forgotten some contracts at the venue and went back to retrieve them. As I approached the building, I saw Victoria's car in the parking lot. Strange, since she'd said she had a spa appointment. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept closer and saw her through the window, wrapped in the arms of a man who definitely wasn't Alexander. Her personal trainer, Marcus, whose hands were exploring places that should have been reserved for her fiancé. They were passionate, desperate, completely lost in each other. I stood there frozen, watching the woman who was about to marry the man I was falling for betray him in the most intimate way possible. The question that haunted me for days afterward was simple. Should I tell Alexander? The answer came 2 weeks before the wedding, in Alexander's private office. I'd gone there to finalize the last details, but the moment I walked in, I knew something had changed between us. The air was electric, charged with all the words we'd never said and all the feelings we'd been trying to ignore. "Emma," he said, standing up from behind his desk, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." My heart was already racing, but I nodded. "I'm in love with you," he said, the words falling between us like stones into still water. "I've been in love with you since that night we talked until dawn. Since you laughed at my terrible joke about wedding cake. Since you stood up for that vendor and reminded me what integrity looks like." I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. "I know this is wrong. I know I'm getting married in 2 weeks. But I can't marry her when every time I look at her I wish she was you. When every time she speaks, I find myself looking for you in the room because your presence is the only thing that makes any of this bearable." The kiss that followed was inevitable. Soft at first, tentative, then desperate as months of suppressed longing crashed over us like a wave. For a moment nothing else existed. Not Victoria, not the wedding, not the impossibility of our situation. Just Alexander and me and the truth we'd been running from. But reality has a way of crashing back in, and ours came in the form of Victoria's voice in the hallway. We broke apart, both breathing hard, both knowing we'd crossed a line we could never uncross. Little did I know Victoria had a secret that would destroy them both. She'd seen us. Somehow, someway, Victoria had discovered our connection, and she wasn't about to let it ruin her perfect wedding. She cornered me the next day, her usual mask of sweetness replaced by something cold and calculating. "I know about you and Alexander," she said, her voice deadly calm. "And I know you think you're some kind of romantic heroine, but let me make something very clear. If you don't disappear, I mean completely vanish from our lives, I will destroy you. Your career, your reputation, your future. I have the money and the connections to make sure you never work in this city again." She leaned closer, her perfume cloying and oppressive. "But more than that, I'll destroy him too. I'll make sure everyone knows that Alexander Kane, the great businessman, couldn't keep his hands off the hired help. How do you think that will play in the media? How do you think his shareholders will react?" The threat hung between us like a blade. I knew she wasn't bluffing. Victoria Sterling had the power to ruin us both, and she would use it without hesitation. So I made the hardest decision of my life. 6 months later, I was living a quiet life in Portland, Oregon, trying to rebuild my career and forget about Alexander Kane. But some things are impossible to forget, especially when they're broadcast on every news channel and social media platform in the country. I was at work when my phone started buzzing with notifications. News alerts, text messages from old colleagues, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Finally, I checked my phone and saw the headline that made my blood run cold. "Billionaire's Wedding Day Scandal Rocks Manhattan Society." I rushed home and turned on the news, watching in stunned silence as reporters detailed the story that was dominating every media outlet. The wedding I'd spent months planning, The ceremony that was supposed to be the social event of the decade had been destroyed by a revelation that no one saw coming. I watched from 3,000 miles away as Alexander stood at the altar, looking like a man going to his execution rather than his wedding. Victoria was radiant in her designer gown, practically glowing with triumph as she walked down the aisle I'd helped design. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd successfully eliminated the threat to her perfect life, and was about to claim her prize. But karma was watching, and it had other plans. Just as the ceremony was about to begin, Alexander's business partner Marcus, not Victoria's trainer Marcus, but his business partner Marcus Webb, burst through the cathedral doors with a tablet in his hands and a look of barely controlled fury on his face. What happened next was karma at its finest. The photos were everywhere within minutes. Explicit images of Victoria with her personal trainer, intimate moments that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. But that wasn't even the worst part. The investigation that followed revealed something far more damaging. Victoria had been feeding confidential information about Alexander's company to competitors through her trainer, who had connections to rival tech firms. Deal after deal had fallen through in the months leading up to the wedding. Stock prices had plummeted. Investors had pulled out. Everyone assumed it was just bad luck, market fluctuations, the normal risks of business. But it was sabotage, orchestrated by the woman who was supposed to love and support him. The financial damage was catastrophic. Alexander's company lost hundreds of millions in value overnight. Major partnerships dissolved. The man who'd been worth nearly $3 billion watched his empire crumble in real time, broadcast live for the world to see. But Victoria's betrayal went even deeper. The investigation revealed that she'd been planning this for over a year, systematically undermining his business while playing the perfect fiancé. She'd been positioning herself to benefit from his downfall, with offshore accounts and secret investments that would have left her wealthy even after destroying him. The irony was perfect and terrible. The woman who'd threatened to destroy my career and reputation had destroyed herself instead. Within hours of the scandal breaking, Victoria went from Manhattan's golden girl to its most notorious pariah. Friends distanced themselves, invitations were rescinded, and the social circle she'd valued above everything else turned their backs on her. She filed for divorce immediately, of course, trying to claim half of what remained of Alexander's assets. But her betrayal had been so thorough, so documented, that even her high-powered lawyers couldn't save her. She walked away with nothing but the designer clothes on her back and a reputation in ruins. I should have felt vindicated. After all, this was the woman who'd threatened to destroy my life, who'd forced me to abandon everything I'd worked for. But watching the news coverage, seeing Alexander's face as his world fell apart, all I felt was heartbreak. He didn't deserve this. No one deserved this level of betrayal from someone they trusted completely. The reports said he disappeared from public view immediately after the scandal broke. His company was in chaos. His personal life was headline news, and the woman he'd planned to marry had orchestrated his professional destruction. I found myself crying for him, this man I'd loved and lost, who was now losing everything else too. What I didn't know was that sometimes the universe saves the best surprises for last. 6 months after Victoria's world imploded, I was finally starting to find my footing again. My new job was going well. I'd made some friends, and while I still thought about Alexander every day, the pain had dulled to a manageable ache. I was learning to live with the knowledge that I'd loved someone I could never have, and maybe that would have to be enough. Then my phone rang on a Tuesday morning and everything changed again. Emma. The voice on the other end was older, professional, but kind. This is Margaret Chen. I'm calling on behalf of Alexander Kane. He's been looking for you. My heart stopped. After all this time, After everything that had happened, Alexander was looking for me? The assistant explained that he'd been trying to find me for months, but I'd changed my name slightly when I moved, taken my mother's maiden name as my middle name, making me harder to track down. He'd like to see you, Margaret said gently. If you're willing. He's in Portland on business this week. I almost said no. What was the point of reopening old wounds, of revisiting a love story that had already caused so much pain? But something in the assistant's voice, some note of urgency, made me hesitate. Is he okay? I asked. There was a pause. I think that's something he needs to tell you himself. We met at a small cafe downtown, far from the glittering world of Manhattan society where our story had begun. I arrived first, my nerves so frayed I could barely sit still. When Alexander walked through the door, I barely recognized him. He was thinner, his hair longer than it had been before, and there was something different in his eyes. The desperate look I'd seen during our late-night planning sessions was gone, replaced by something calmer but sadder. He looked like a man who'd been through hell and somehow found his way out the other side. Emma, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, I admitted. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us struggling with where to begin. Finally, Alexander spoke. I owe you an apology, he said. A massive, inadequate apology for putting you in an impossible position, for not fighting harder for what we had, for letting her threats scare you away when I should have protected you. I started to protest, but he held up a hand, just like he had in his office all those months ago. I found out about the threats, Emma. After everything came out, I hired investigators to piece together the whole story. I know what Victoria said to you. I know why you left. And I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to see through her manipulation at the time. Tears were burning behind my eyes. Alexander, you couldn't have known. But I should have fought for us, he interrupted. I should have called off the wedding the moment I realized I was in love with you. Instead, I let fear and obligation and the pressure to maintain appearances drive away the only real thing in my life. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. I've spent the last year rebuilding my company from the ground up. Smaller now, more focused, but it's actually mine again. I've learned the difference between success and fulfillment, between what looks perfect and what actually is perfect. And Victoria? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Alexander's expression hardened slightly. Living in a studio apartment in Queens, last I heard. Her parents cut her off after the scandal, her friends abandoned her, and the money she thought she'd hidden was frozen by the courts. She got exactly what she deserved. But then his expression softened as he looked at me. The question is, can you forgive me? Can you give us another chance? Because Emma, I've spent every day of the last 18 months thinking about you. Wondering where you were, if you were happy, if you ever thought about what we could have been. I looked at this man who'd lost everything and somehow found himself in the process. The Alexander sitting across from me was different from the one I'd fallen in love with during those late-night planning sessions. He was more grounded, more sure of who he was and what he wanted. I never stopped thinking about you, I whispered. Even when I tried to move on, even when I told myself it was impossible, I never stopped loving you. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. Then come home with me, Emma. Not to the world we knew before, not to the life that was built on lies and appearances. Come build something real with me. Something that's just ours. 6 months later, I was back in New York, but this time as Alexander's partner in every sense of the word. We'd bought a smaller place in Brooklyn, far from the Manhattan social scene that had nearly destroyed us both. I was running my own event planning company, specializing in intimate, meaningful celebrations rather than ostentatious displays of wealth. Alexander's company had rebounded stronger than ever, built on the foundation of the lessons he'd learned from his spectacular fall. He was happier, more present, more himself than I'd ever seen him. And Victoria? The last I heard, she was working at a department store in New Jersey, her dreams of social prominence as shattered as the life she tried to build on lies and manipulation. Sometimes I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The universe has a way of balancing the scales, even when it takes time for justice to reveal itself. Victoria had everything: wealth, beauty, social status, a man who would have loved her if she'd let him. But her greed, her cruelty, her willingness to destroy others for her own benefit, ultimately destroyed her instead. Meanwhile, I'd lost everything: my career, my city, the man I loved, because I tried to do the right thing. But in the end, my sacrifice was rewarded. Sometimes karma doesn't just punish the guilty. It also rewards those who stayed true to themselves, even when it cost them everything. Alexander and I got married on a beach in Maine, surrounded by 30 of our closest friends and family members. No society photographers, no magazine covers, no million-dollar budget. Just two people who'd found their way back to each other through heartbreak and betrayal, and the kind of love that survives anything. As I stood there in my simple white dress, watching Alexander's face as he promised to love me for the rest of our lives, I realized something profound. Victoria had been right about one thing: this wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. Sometimes the universe has a way of setting things right, even when we think all hope is lost. What did you think of this story? Did Victoria get what she deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story gave you chills, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Because sometimes the best love stories are the ones that survive the worst betrayals. And sometimes karma's timing is absolutely perfect.